Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
I can't remember when I had the dream. I was a kid, I think, but a little older, maybe in high school. It had been a tiring day, or at least I was very tired that night. I remember my eyelids felt heavy, weighted even, as though my body was still asleep, even as my mind crept back towards consciousness. My vision was blurry, unfocused. The sharp corners of the end of my bed, my closet door, and my dresser all rounded and unrefined. I had only a vague idea of the shape of the clutter of my room, and even that idea was informed more by memory than by my own unreliable faculties. In my semi-awake state, I was not surprised to see at the end of my bed a figure shrouded in the same midnight shadows draping the rest of my room. In dreams, even the waking ones, you'd see things that aren't supposed to be where they are, and you don't question it. This figure was, to the best of my admittedly hazy knowledge, my best friend. We'd been friends as far back as I can remember, so I knew his shape well, even if I couldn't see the details of his form. Yet, as is often the case in dreams, I knew with a guaranteed certainty that, no matter how identical in appearance it may be, the shadow at the end of my bed was not my best friend. He had his shaved head, his narrow shoulders, his long arms and legs, but it was not him. The sense of him was wholly wrong, totally mismatched. This figure which had been watching me doze was no one whom I had ever even seen, let alone invited into my home. I lacked the cognitive skill to muster speech, but I heard my thoughts projected audibly all the same, filling the air as clearly as if I had uttered them aloud. "What are you doing here?" I asked. In my dream mind, I knew that this visitor was lurking here for some purpose, some malevolent goal which caused an accusatory tone in my projected voice. It said nothing, however, and instead focused its yellowy eyes towards my own, locking its gaze with mine with an expression of curiosity. "Get out of here," I said, or thought again. "Go away." The thing that looked like my best friend didn't react. It didn't so much as blink its big eyes. It just sat there looking at me with a curious sort of look, like a little kid ogling some exotic animal in the zoo. "You're a liar," I said, trying to express my annoyance. "You're not Drew. You're trying to trick me." "I'm Drew," it said in a voice identical to my best friend's. Every accent, inflection, the slight drawl on the last syllable. The dream thing performed an impeccable impersonation, as if it had spent countless hours listening to Drew's voice, mastering all the little subtleties. "You're not supposed to be awake," it continued. "Go back to sleep." Icy cold fingers gripped my heart, my chest freezing as I suddenly found myself struggling to breathe. It wasn't supposed to speak, and it certainly wasn't supposed to sound like Drew. My dream's logic informed me that speech was a thing which my unconscious had not assigned to the shadow. The action was totally foreign to the universal laws of my own mind, as strange and unsettling as if one day I were to wake up and see the sun rising in the west. "Shut up," I said again, though my voice had lost its previous confidence. "Go away. This is my room." It didn't say anything this time. The shadow just sat there, looking at me, studying me. Then, slowly, it swung my friend's legs over my bed frame and stood to Drew's full 5 feet and 11 inches. Then, its face still expressionless, the shadow pointed at something. It wasn't me. It was further past me, and it took a moment for my mind to realize that it was pointing outside the window beside my bed. I shifted my eyes to the left, straining to catch a glimpse of what it was the shadow wanted me to see. But all I could discern was the night sky, cold and infinite and uncaring. I was beyond fear at this point, certain now that whatever this thing was, it most certainly had to be more than a dream, more than a figment of my exhausted mind. Surely this was some demon, some cryptic haunting thing that lurked in the shadows of men's minds since time immemorial. I simply lacked the perverse creativity to muster the image of so blasphemous a being, a thing which wore the skin of my oldest and dearest friend to get close to me and steal my trust. Yet, after only a few minutes of pointing towards my window, it finally did leave my room. It turned slowly and deliberately before walking away with the casual jaunt of a young man whose only concerns are grades and girls, the jaunt of my best friend. Yet as it stood in my open doorframe, it paused, and with that same slowness, craned its head back towards me, turning Drew's neck at an angle just barely too sharp for a human neck to turn. Its face, though, was no longer Drew's. Instead, it wore the shaded visage of a man of long years and weathered features. The skin was brown and sun-damaged, the proportions of the eyes and nose foreign to what I was accustomed to. He looked to me vaguely Egyptian, though this is only a rough guess, as it seemed that this face concealed secrets of time and space and dreams beneath a faulty human exterior. I looked into those yellow eyes one last time, despite my consuming shock, and saw an intelligence lurking in them that transcended humanity itself, surpassing our ideas of gods and science, dwarfing our understanding of the material world in which we lived. To the Egyptian thing, I was a small and useless creature, a curiosity in a cold and uncaring dimension of time and space. My petty life was a source of mild amusement for this unspeakable intelligence. The study of my dreams, nothing more than a pastime. Then it left, rounding a corner in the hallway and never again appearing before my waking or dreaming eyes. Yet now, years later, I find myself grappling with the thing which I tell myself was surely a dream. Doubtless this was a being which my mind had conjured of its own volition, without thought nor care to how such a horrible entity might shock my conscious self. Yet those eyes, yellow and interested, were of an antiquity so beyond my limited understanding of the world that I could see the brimming secrets of the cosmos dancing on their surface. And should the impossible be true, and the Egyptian thing truly exist, then perhaps it serviced me by leaving. For had I gazed too long into those alluring yellow pools, I might have been lost to them, lost to a world of splendor and glory never meant for men. And should my soul trespass into these forbidden places, then surely madness would be my only reward. These thoughts I ponder still as I drift to sleep each night. And each night, just as consciousness slips again from my grasp, I faintly hope to see him again, just to catch a glimpse of those golden orbs one last time. 2 suns embedded in a shadow as dark as night.
Whoever popularized the phrase zombie apocalypse and thought of what it entailed needed to be horsewhipped, flogged, and given a good old-fashioned spanking for good measure. At least that was the opinion held by Leon Winters. He drove his modified armored bank car down the interstate, the city of Dallas, Texas growing closer with each passing second. Leon was a Jackal, the unofficial nickname for the freelance zombie killers that entered the infected zones. Their job was to kill the undead for the benefit of civilians who were disappointed at having their zombie apocalypse fantasies dashed, but too cowardly to enact them. When the undead had arrived, they had not brought the ruin of humanity with them. The militaries of the world had been quick to contain the hordes, setting up quarantine zones that consisted of many cities and towns, and a vaccine had been made by the Trinity Corporation. But with that came the trouble of what to do with the infected. Sending the military or police in to exterminate them was supposedly deemed unethical and a risk to the personnel and any possible uninfected survivors. That was where the Jackals came in. Originally formed as a vigilante effort to fight the zombies, they eventually caught the attention of the government, who outlawed their work unless it was used for public services or entertainment. By the sadistic whims of some trickster god for all Leon knew, that translated to getting paid to live-stream zombie snuff videos. The insanity of it would have made him laugh if not for some of his viewership. Reading some of their requests made him ill sometimes. Set them on fire, one might say. Kill them with household appliances, another would read. Kill only the females, read a rather nasty viewer, to which he just blocked and reported them. Yes, sir, this was the post-apocalypse everyone had waited so eagerly for, where society flourished in most places and became third-world undead-infested shitholes in others, where the rugged survivors were just some schmucks with cameras who slaughtered the undead for the vicarious pleasure of anonymous gorehounds who couldn't be bothered to do it themselves. Leon sighed, then pulled a cigarette from his pocket and lit it, letting the bitter, earthy smell of the tobacco fill his lungs and steal another year of his life, so the doctor had told him once. Wonder if I'd taste like tobacco to zombies, he mused in a moment of dark humor. Wouldn't that be a sight? Oh, God, these are the worst lungs I've ever eaten. What the hell did you do to yourself, you poor bastard? He laughed quietly at the image, taking some solace in the fact that he had at least inconvenienced them. Hey, they'd be devouring him. He may as well go out giving them the proverbial bird. Pulling up to the cordon outside the city, Leon showed his ID after a routine inspection. He was cleared to enter, though he heard one of the soldiers muttering "Jackal prick" under his breath. Not that Leon could blame him. He knew his profession was less than ethical. Driving a few more miles, the cordon had been set up to prevent the zombies from getting too far. He eventually entered the city. Sure enough, there were a group of shambling corpses a quarter of a mile from him. Making sure that his body armor was properly secured, he inspected his weapons: a large tactical knife, an assault rifle, a pump shotgun, and a semi-automatic handgun. He put a series of grenades and spare mags on his belt and in his tactical pouch respectively, along with bandages and other medical supplies. Once he was done, he put on the helmet with the gas mask, then pressed a button on the side. The eyes of his mask lit up, and the chat box on the side appeared on his heads-up display. With a ping, his first commenter gave the classic greeting of "first." Saying nothing, his gloved hands grasped the steering wheel as he revved his engine. The commenters began to respond accordingly, prompting various responses of "oh shit" or "here it comes," and other eager exclamations. Interstage right, he thought. Glad he didn't say it out loud, since he didn't know if that was the right term to use. He put the vehicle into drive and floored the gas pedal, plowing into the horde of zombies in front of him. Bodies splattered all over the truck, the sidewalk, and the nearby buildings, decorating the vehicle and the road behind him with a grisly new paint job. For the sake of style, he quickly turned the vehicle so that it drifted along the road for a few feet before stopping. Sure enough, the chat was filled to the brim with excited pings, so much so that he muted the sound. He gave a thumbs up to the camera in his mask. He had made his career as a jackal by doing what he did without an intro, catchphrase, commentary, or any words whatsoever due to wanting to be more efficient and professional. That, and he just wasn't much of a talker. Some of the thirst comments he read only made him that much gladder he kept his face hidden from anyone who wasn't in the military. Slinging the shotgun over his shoulder, he then jumped out of the vehicle and landed on the ground, assault rifle in his hands. He let off a few shots into one of the nearest zombies that had survived his Mr. Mercedes onslaught. 3 shots in the chest, 2 in the head. It fell with a sound like a throat made of sandpaper, though he couldn't say why that was the first thing that came to mind. He closed and locked the door of his truck. As luck would have it, another one of the surviving zombies was one of the freshies, zombies that didn't rot. It shrieked at him, then started running straight at him. Pretending to be caught off guard for the audience's sake, he let the freshie tackle him, struggling to clamp its teeth into his flesh. Not that it would have done much good due to the body armor. This was interrupted by Leon driving his knife into its throat. It gurgled. Then he removed his handgun and fired under his chin, coating the camera eyes of his mask in blood, much to the excitement of his viewers. He felt the freshie fall limply off of him, and he wiped away the blood and retrieved the knife. The timer, which had started the second he had exited the vehicle, continued its countdown from 60 minutes. That was all he needed to do for his streams. Kill zombies for a specific amount of time, then just leave. And so that was what he was setting about doing. He lightly jogged, albeit weighted down by the armor and shotgun. Zombies, fresh and rotted alike, walked the streets, their heads snapping to attention at the sight of new meat. As he aimed the rifle at them, firing off controlled bursts, one of his viewers, to his annoyance, began to spam the chat with "Grenade, grenade, dumbass, grenade." Others began to join in on the complaints, not seeming to get that he was trying to lure the freshies in so he could shoot them and save his grenades for if he was surrounded by the rotted. Eventually, though, he complied and pulled the pin, throwing it in their direction, blowing several of the zombies to pieces. Now exasperated that his compliance with backseaters had caused him to take on this next duty, he walked to where the grenade had exploded, then began shooting the remains. Still, he said nothing. He needed to put on a good show. As if to emphasize this, a notification appeared, showing that he had received $250 from one of his viewers. Giving a thumbs up to acknowledge this, he continued. He wouldn't be going too deep into the city, just a few miles in at most. Then the stream would end and he would head back to the vehicle. He snuck up behind a zombie in a nearby alley, his viewers sending in enthusiastic comments like, "Ooh shit, he's gonna do the thing. He's gonna do the thing." Sure enough, he did the thing, i.e., grabbing the zombie's head and with a grunt snapping its neck. This was easily accomplished by virtue of it being rotted. It collapsed with a raspy snarl mixed with gurgling as it died. A notification told him that he had received $450 from some username he didn't bother to memorize, just giving another thumbs up. Leon continued on his less than merry way, shooting, stabbing, and bludgeoning zombies with nearby objects. As he went, he took notice of the ruined orange jumpsuits many of the freshies and rotteds wore. It wasn't much of a secret by now what many inmates faced as a means of cutting down on prison costs, but it still made him sick to think about. And that didn't stop a few of his viewers from expressing their assumptions of what the zombies did when they were still human, and declaring this to be justice. Justice. Leon didn't care what they had done. Nobody deserved to be turned into a lifeless husk, forced to shamble around, eating people. Not even the rich old fools who had put that policy in place. The kindest thing that he could do for them was give them a quick death and ignore some of his viewers that demanded slower, gorier deaths. A couple of them even began saying things like how other jackals were much better because they straight up tortured the zombies. It was true. Leon had watched those streams, and that was how he was able to emphasize with that soldier's perspective on jackals. His ruminations were interrupted by a message. You have received $560 from... Leon didn't look at the username, just gave another thumbs up, then continued. At some point, he checked his timer. 10 minutes left and counting. Oh, damn. I've been at it for that long already, he thought. Isn't time supposed to fly when you're having fun? Evidently not if the timer had anything to say about it. Well, at least he was almost finished. This was interrupted by a high-pitched shriek that caused the zombies to stand still. Any attention they had on him was diverted to the sound, as was Leon's. He had encountered a couple of these before, but not often. The virus, known colloquially as the Trinity strain, after the company who accidentally made it and made the subsequent vaccine, was not the typical zombie contagion. For some people, it immediately turned them into shambling corpses through rapid necrosis, letting them keep only the instinct to eat. Others turned into the freshies, who also possessed a desire to eat and nothing else. But for a select few, the virus made them into the aberrants. These were stronger, faster, and more intelligent than the average zombie. There was one catch, of course. Like the others, its humanity was sacrificed by its need to eat. But unlike the other types, it still had enough functionality in its brain to enjoy eating, and to not only be pleased by the feeding, but by the chase and the kill. The kicker? It scared the zombies too, and for very good reason. Unlike the zombies, it didn't just eat humans. Case in point, a block away, Leon watched as the howling aberrant pounced onto a freshie, then dug its teeth into the side of its neck, pulling away and chewing messily. It was a tall, muscular man with long, shaggy black hair. Its face was mutilated and eyes completely bloodshot. Its nails had grown out into long, jagged claws. As it chewed, it watched its prey choke, milky eyes looking at the hunk of meat that used to be attached to its throat, then breathe its last, at which point the aberrant spat out the flesh it wasn't already chewing. It wasn't human anymore, but it was still just human enough in the worst possible ways. The aberrant turned its bloody face towards Leon, and even though the gore coated its face, he knew it was smiling at the sight of fresher meat. Of course, Leon had no intention of letting this thing eat him. His past experiences with aberrants were the reason he wore body armor after all. He ignored the chat exploding into a chorus of "holy shit," "run," "what the fuck is that," and more helpful screeches of "grenade, grenade, grenade." Closing the chat, he set his assault rifle on the ground. It would do him no good. He was glad he brought the shotgun with him as he removed it from his shoulder. It charged at him snarling, splattering any of the zombies frozen in primal fear that stood in its path. Pumping the shotgun, Leon prepared himself, knees bent slightly for the strategy he had devised for these creatures. It was just 10 feet in front of him now, and it was clearly banking on its strength being its saving grace rather than speed or skill. It was trying to knock him down, then eat him. The thing was, like its siblings before it, it didn't know Leon Winters as well as it thought it did. It thought he was standing still because he was afraid like the freshie had been. But just as it was 9 feet away, it leapt for him, and he rolled out of its path, letting it skid along the asphalt, giving it what had to be the world's worst knee and elbow scrapes, if the Crimson Trail had anything to say about it. As it raised its head up to furiously regard its would-be prey and attack again, it came face to muzzle with Leon's shotgun, which then erupted into a brief flash and a loud crack as it sent the slug round into its skull. Its arms flailed limply in the air for a moment, then it collapsed, the pulpy ruin of its head spreading over the asphalt. Leon let out the breath he had been holding, then pulled back on the slide of the shotgun, ejecting the smoking shell. Seeing that their apex predator was now dead, the zombies broke out of their fearful trance and ignored Leon completely as they began gathering around the once hulking monstrosity. They didn't actively hunt humans or each other. They were more opportunistic when it came to food. A beast that was still human enough would serve as a perfect meal for them. Sighing, Leon picked up his rifle, slung the shotgun over his shoulder, and walked back to the truck. He checked his timer. It had run down, and the number of zombies he had killed, not counting the ones he had run over, showing itself to be about 67. A lot of jackals didn't get more than 50, either due to focusing too much on showing off, sightseeing, or being big-mouthed jackasses, whereas Leon was more pragmatic, saving any spectacle for the intro. Once secured inside the truck, he removed the ammo from the guns and switched the safeties back on. He then reopened the chat, which was exploding again with praise, numerous donations adding up to the sum of $30,500, including the previous donations, and still more grating comments asking about why he didn't use grenades or why he didn't kill any more zombies on the way back. Clenching his teeth, Leon forced himself to wave into the camera eyes of his mask, a message showing the chat that his next stream was scheduled for about 2 weeks from then. With that, he switched his helmet off, looked for the cushion he used for long trips, then pressed his face into it and gave a muffled, cathartic scream. His frustrations quelled, he cranked up his truck, then began to drive out of Dallas. Stopping at the cordon, he was inspected for bites with the same soldier that insulted him before pointing out the blood covering Leon in the truck, then sardonically asking,
"Well, they do say that you'll never work a day in your life if you love your job."
Leon ignored the quip, instead hopping back into his truck once the inspection was finished, then began driving away. That was what separated Leon from fictional zombie killers. They had goals, ambitions, motives. Hunt down an evil corporation spreading the zombie virus, look for a cure, escape a zombie-infested city, survive in a shopping mall, kill zombies because they were brutal sociopaths who found a good excuse, etc. Not Leon. Leon only did what his viewers wanted, did what he could to pay for everyday necessities. It was a day in the office for him. That was why he put up with those jackasses on his streams, save for the ones who said truly obscene things. He couldn't block or report people for annoying him unless it crossed the line into harassment, a matter of semantics in his work. As he continued driving down the deserted interstate, he thought over his job. The soldier had missed the mark. Leon didn't enjoy his job, nor when he was in Special Forces, not now. He was just damn good at it. Society didn't accept people of his skill set, though. They only enjoyed watching him use it for their own benefit. His fans might mourn his loss if he ever met his end during a stream, if only because they'd never see his brand of zombie murder again. But they'd quickly move on to some other jackal, one who was more compliant and talkative than himself. Still, he'd keep at it. There had been a few fans who had messaged him personally after streams, asking if he was okay, if he needed to take a break, saying he seemed a bit on edge while filming, despite him not speaking a word. It was for those fans that he did this. They may have liked living their zombie fantasies through him, but at least they cared about him as a person. He heard a ping from his phone, a message from one of his viewers. He knew he'd hear more, and he'd go through them when he got home. Who knew? Maybe another one of the more considerate fans might have messaged him out of concern. It was a naive hope, sure, but at least it gave him something to look forward to in this line of work.
There was no coming back from this point. That was Michael's only thought as he ventured deeper into the jungle. Humidity was something he was more than used to coming from Australia. But the insects, oversized trees, and bushes were something else entirely. The thick, muddy slop that could be considered ground gave way under each boot press. It was midday. Now the heat blazed between the canopy of trees above him. Each sun shaft that cut through the tree line sizzled away at his skin. His editor had finally given him the freedom to pick a story. His years of slaving away doing puff pieces and meaningless local dribble had paid off. Here he was halfway around the world, about to get the breaking story that would land him a Pulitzer Prize. No one had noticed the patterns he had over the last few years. Increasing storms across the coasts of Southern America, each one forming closer to land than the last, until this one, which had formed right in the heart of the Amazon itself. This in itself was nothing out of the ordinary. It was the fact that this storm didn't move at all. It seemed to form and dissipate in the same spot. Luckily for him, his friend worked for the Bureau of Meteorology and, like him, had a fascination for things that seemed otherwise unexplainable. The tip and timing of his boss's relaxation on the reins was the perfect catalyst for Michael's ascension into journalistic glory. All he had to do now was find the damn spot the storm had happened. He had been wandering around the jungle for what must have been hours. His GPS had stopped working before he had even left the main road. Now it was just him, a map, and a compass. Not the most ideal of circumstances, but it was the best he was going to get. Nothing would stop him from getting this story. The growth grew thicker the further he moved toward his goal. The humidity only got worse, so Michael knew he had to be getting close now. The sunlight was starting to dim, but not from the time of day. He could see a thick bank of clouds beginning to form overhead. Even between the trees, the darkness enveloping the sky was evident. It wasn't until the tree line started to give way that Michael noticed the ground was eerily dry. Despite the torrential storms and rainfall registered in the region, the ground itself seemed parched and thirsty for more. The occasional pool of water in between some roots in a ditch was all he could find. Now, from between the rows of trees, Michael could see the clearing perfectly. He had expected lush vegetation and mossy grass to fill the space, but it was dry dirt with occasional pools of murky water. Michael smacked away more mosquitoes and other insects that thrived on the stagnant water. Their hunger for his blood was almost insatiable, as with each swipe their numbers only multiplied. He pulled out a can of insect repellent, which would normally be used to spray the air around you, but instead, he layered it all over his skin to act as a barrier. There was no sign of life here, except those of the insects. The clearing continued further than he could see through. It appeared to go on forever with no sign of an end on either side of him. All he could see behind him were the rows of trees he had emerged from. After consulting his map and compass, this part of the forest hadn't been properly explored, so there was every chance it simply hadn't been discovered yet. The realization of exploring an as of yet unexplored section of the forest made his discovery even more tantalizing. Not only would he get the story of a lifetime, but he might even find a new species of animal. The trek became markedly easier now. He wasn't contending with roots and muddy ground. Instead, it was a flat land of small potholes and puddles. Strangely, he carried on until he could no longer see the tree line behind him, but found nothing. Even if this area hadn't been explored fully, Surely satellites would have picked up on this massive empty swath of land. There was no use to think about it now. He only had to carry on further. With the clouds completely blocking the sun, he could no longer tell the time of day. If he didn't have a watch, he would be sure it was night. As he lifted the watch, he was sure it was only early afternoon, but somehow it was nearly 10 at night. Bugs and nightlife noises began to lower and eventually disappear entirely. There was nothing left but the thump of his footsteps and the low thrum under his feet. It started when he first entered the forest, which wasn't entirely unusual. One of the locals described it as the beating heart of the forest, an apt name given it seemed to be and flow like a heartbeat. Now, though, with the noises of everything lowering, it became clearer. As he walked onward, the thrum seemingly became louder. The lingering sunlight jutting through the clouds gave way to inescapable darkness. Michael turned on his flashlight, which seemed to almost be swallowed up by the surrounding abyss. It barely shone a few meters in front of him. He gave it a few smacks to make sure the batteries were lined up, but it simply flickered slightly and lit up the same. There was nothing wrong with the torch, but he felt something was wrong with the night around him. It wasn't cold. It wasn't even humid anymore. With as much haste as he could muster, Michael dropped his satchel and rolled out the components of his tent. He hadn't intended to stay the night, but had come prepared regardless. A small tent fit for one and enough food and water to last a week, at least. If he rationed well, he could last 2. The tent took no time to set up, and he climbed inside, zipping it up behind him. The safety of the soft walls felt like a warm home. He calmed his nerves and wrapped himself up in his sleeping bag. Despite the lack of cold or warmth, Michael couldn't sleep without a blanket or something on top of him. The scratching from outside the tent jolted Michael awake. He didn't move as he sat there and listened to it. At least 3 distinct sharp claws were being dragged over his tent's outer shell. He couldn't hear any footsteps, and given the lack of light, he couldn't make out a silhouette either. The scraping traveled around his tent before finally stopping at the zipper. A small jingle, whatever it was, grabbed a hold of the zipper. Michael slowly reached for the torch with the hopes of using it as a weapon. After a few tense seconds, the zipper stayed where it was, and the scratching ceased. Michael lay in the sleeping bag for hours waiting for whatever it was to come back and break through. Maybe it was waiting to ambush him when he left, or maybe it didn't care and had simply moved on. Whatever it was, he wasn't going out there to find out. He was safe here. At least he kept telling himself that. It wasn't until a few small beams of sunlight could be seen reflecting off the edges of the tent that Michael could muster the courage to get up. A gradual move to the edges of the zipper was all Michael managed. There wasn't any noise coming from outside the tent, so surely the creature had left with the sun's rising. Surely enough, his fears were assuaged when at last he opened the tent to an empty expanse of well-lit dirt. The tent was only open far enough that he was able to crawl out, but Michael moved on all fours into the spongy earth beneath him. After pulling himself up to his feet, Michael looked around and noticed the entire ground was damp. Despite being up most of the night, he didn't hear a single drop, but if he didn't know any better, he could have sworn it rained. "The moisture confuses you." A voice came from behind Michael which startled him into almost falling back through his tent. "Please, my friend, I bring you no harm, only the comfort of guidance." The soft voice came from a tall, older-looking man. His wrinkles folded over themselves so many times there wasn't a single patch of flat skin. "Your time here will be fraught with more perils if you continue aimlessly. Please, allow me to show you the structure you seek." He turned and began walking back the way Michael was sure he had come. "Just let me pack up the tent," Michael called out while he picked up his rucksack. "You will no longer require it, I assure you." The man waved his hand back at Michael and simply carried on. Both of them walked on in silence for a while until Michael couldn't hold back the urge to barrage the man with questions any longer. "So, who are you, and why are you here? Also, how did you know I was here? And where exactly are we going? I don't even really know what I'm looking for, so how can you know what I'm looking for?" Michael vomited the words out without any care to have the questions answered before asking the next. The old man laughed with a small cackle before stopping to look at Michael. Did you not realize I can give you all the answers because I know exactly what is going to happen? He pulled the skin back on his face, making it taut. It took Michael a moment to have the revelation of what he was looking at. How is that possible? He asked as he rubbed his eyes. Me. He stumbled over the words. Another laugh from the old man. Yes, and stuck here for so long, but we'll fix that, I hope, old Michael said. He carried on walking. Each step seemed more of a struggle than the last. Michael, still frozen in shock, had to shake himself back into the moment and ran to catch up to himself. But how is this possible? He asked again. All things are possible here, as far as I can tell. We're not in time anymore, old Michael said, wistfully, looking up into the clear sunny sky. We're cursed, or at least this place is, and we, or you, or me, whichever you want, was stupid enough to come here, chasing that damned story. Well, it's here, and you'll tell it. So there is a reason all the storms were moving towards this area and just holding over this one spot, Michael said as he followed slightly behind old Michael. That is where your questions will be answered. Old Michael pointed towards the horizon, and a glistening pyramid loomed, just breaching the tip of their view. Michael squinted to see and noticed the golden tip of what he realized would be a massive structure. How did I not see that when I came in? You couldn't. You weren't ready. You needed to stay here and be one with it. Then you would be ready. Ready for the lessons. Old Michael's voice seemed to fade away with the last few words as Michael was distracted looking at the horizon. He turned around and he was alone again. Every direction was empty. Was all that a figment of his imagination, or was it with him from the future? It couldn't have been, could it? He made a mental note of their conversation to write down later. One of his best qualities as a journalist was his ability to create notes in his head instead of needing to write things down. He imagined a notepad writing the words down, and his memory kept every word safe till he needed them. It took a few more hours before Michael made it to the base of the pyramid. It was colossal in scale, which made its placement here all the more perplexing to him. How had he not seen it? Or better question, how had no one picked this thing up from space? It was so large he couldn't see the edges of it. It blocked out the very sun as far as he could see behind him. The silhouette of the shaded sun beamed around the upper edges. Without warning or compunction, his feet started walking up the steps. The faculties of his body were no longer in his control with each step he made upward. The bricks layering the outside were chipped and worn with time, as if the pyramid was old beyond anything Michael had ever seen. The steps were uneven, and each one was missing a few bricks that had either been eroded or broken away. The winds began to whip as he climbed. The closer he drew to the summit, the more ferocious they became. He felt his hands get pulled down and grip the stonework for support. His body contorted onto all fours to give himself the stability to continue his ascent. A small hole large enough for Michael to crawl through was all that awaited him once he had reached the top. He looked up for a moment before his body pulled himself inside. All he could see was the shining capstone of the pyramid as it glistened in the sun. Then he noticed the sun itself was no longer the yellow ball of light. It was now black and larger than it had ever been. Michael stared at it for a moment, almost lost in a trance, as the black sun looked back at him. There was a shift in the darkness of the sun. He could have sworn he saw something slither across the surface. Before he could observe any further, he felt his hands and feet move him into the hole against his best efforts to keep himself out. Michael tried to scream as he felt the stonework give way to nothingness. He scrambled to grab at anything as he hurtled down the abyss of the pyramid. There was a void of noise or light that consumed his every sense. He could feel nothing, hear nothing, and scream nothing. It was as if his consciousness itself had been torn from his body and stripped of everything that made up reality. "You exist here to bring word of the coming beyond our borders." A voice shattered the silence and pierced Michael's mind. "You will experience the transcendental bliss that they have come to share." The voice continued. Michael finally felt his senses return. First, it was hearing, as he could make out the sloshing of fluids and slapping of skin against skin. Then he could smell the necrotic air that burnt his nostrils. Finally, his eyes came into focus out of the darkness and saw the chamber he was standing in. Despite his initial feeling of falling when he entered, here he stood completely unharmed and with all his extremities still attached. As he looked around to try and take in his surroundings, Michael made note of the ancient pillars supporting the room. The black marble was etched with wrapping tendrils that snaked their way up toward a darkened roof. Small sconces provided minimal light among the walls, but a larger fire towards the rear of the room created enough light to see a man kneeling in front of it. The fire itself seemed to act in an unnatural writhing, as if it refused to die. It danced around the pile of kindling, which seemed too small for the size of the fire. The man got up and pulled back on the dark hood that had obscured his face. It was another Michael. "You have arrived. We have waited millennia or days, depending on your view of time," the robed Michael said. He walked down a few erratically carved marble stairs. "You're the journalist?" he asked. Michael stood there for a moment, unsure of how to answer himself. "Well, you are Michael, an accomplished journalist? Here to get the story of a lifetime?" he asked again. Again, Michael was wordless, as he could not answer. The robed Michael laughed with two voices. "How foolish of me! I forgot to give you back your voice." He unhinged his jaw and lowered his arm into his mouth and down his throat. His neck fattened as the arm lowered down into his chest. He pulled it back out, covered in thick bile and blood. His hand held a strange wriggling mass of eyeballs and stalks. The more Michael tried to focus on the creature, the more it seemed to shift into new, more fantastical appearances. Its existence was constantly in flux before it latched on Michael's face. He felt small hands and fingers grip his lips and pry them apart before they climbed inside his mouth. Suddenly, Michael felt his voice come back and he let out a scream that reverberated off the marble caverns. The other Michael quickly clamped his bloodied hand over his mouth to shut him up. "Take a moment, collect yourself, then answer the question," he said in a whisper as he slowly slid the wet hand off his face, leaving a thick layer of bile and blood covering his nose and mouth. Michael felt his breathing get heavier as he tried to calm himself from the mixture of emotions swirling inside him. His mind had kept himself together up until a point. He had kept himself locked at the moment, taking note of every interaction or difference as a piece of evidence for his story. Now he was being forced to think and probe his mind. He wasn't collecting anymore. He was recalling. His pupils dilated and his chest expanded and contracted with deep, uneasy breaths. How had he gotten here? His mind wasn't his own. He was living inside someone else as he watched it unfold around him. What was this place? How was he looking at himself again? "All questions you might get answers to after you answer mine," robed Michael said. "Your thoughts are my thoughts. I can see inside you. Now tell me what I want to hear," he said again. Michael opened his mouth and uttered the one word he could sense he needed to say. "Yes." The ground underneath both of them shook, while an echoed cry of unbridled delight boomed forth. It sounded as though it was a gurgled sloshing of orifices spewing forth words in a dialect indiscernible to his ears. "Their words are not for our ears. You will enter the fire, and they will grant you a boon that you might take it with you in spreading the gospel of their word." The robed Michael stepped aside and gestured towards the dancing flames atop the platform. Their flickering intensified with each step he took. He couldn't fathom why he was still doing anything he was asked, but he continued regardless. There was a carving behind the flame that seemed to depict a circle spiraling inwards, except Michael couldn't find a beginning or end to the circle. It moved on its own as the flames waved around, lighting it up, but the circle was endless. Your acceptance will come easier if you don't resist. Those were the last words Michael heard before his foot touched the fire and felt his body burn with the intensity of the sun itself. His flesh melted and he could feel his clothes fusing with the sinew under his skin, his screams muffled as his lips fused from the heat. Somehow he was still alive. Despite his body being melted around him, he continued to live. Then he felt something at the edge of his mind creep in. There were no words, only the feeling of complete chaos, an overwhelming urge for violence and death. The pain was overtaken by a deathly cry to tear away at someone's flesh. All he could think about was imagining some crying fool's head under his palms as he squeezed, all the while they cried for mercy. He would give them nothing until their anguished screams were replaced with empty silence. Everything subsided, and as the emotions of pain and violence washed away like the tide, Michael felt the void left in their wake. He looked down and there were no flames, only the marble stonework. His body was completely fine, but as he raised his head, he got a momentary glimpse. A flicker of the creature lay just below the crust. He felt suddenly pulled into space as he looked down and saw the planet beneath him. The pyramid itself was now visible. It looked like a beacon shooting into heaven. The crust of the earth slid off itself like the meat from a well-cooked bone, and it revealed the parasitic horror that was eating away at its core. There was no escape. It was everywhere. Under every ocean and every continent, it had wormed its way across the globe. The writhing mass of flesh was incomprehensible in size. Its form was beyond his mind to fathom. There were mouths inside mouths, eyes sliding over eyes, all mixed in with endless tentacles and tendrils that seemed to start nowhere and end nowhere. Nothing seemed to be attached to anything, but somehow all connected as one being. Michael felt a connection to it as if he was being spoken to, but it didn't use words, at least any that he understood. He was being shown a vision of a future that he would help create. It just needed him to spread the word. He would be the herald to bring its word into reality. The formless concept as it was now, but if he could get enough people to think and believe, it would be reality. A reality of chaos and bloodshed. It would unleash the very inner turmoil and animalistic urges that boiled underneath the surface of all living things. None would be spared. The thoughts and inner desires of the creature permeated Michael's mind. His vision clouded over and he felt the cold marble again beneath his feet. The fire was gone, and the chamber was only dimly lit by the wall sconces. He has returned, and with him the thoughtless void. The robed Michael stood among a group of other robed figures. Each one lowered their hood, revealing another Michael of varying ages. "We are finally free," one of the oldest-looking Michaels said. "He has traversed realities and bent the very fabric of the universe to select you. We are no longer worthy." The robed Michael pulled a black marble-carved dagger from under his robe. "Together, we will be given the greatest gift, the release of death. You will carry on our legacy, his legacy, and with it, you will live eternally." He plunged the dagger into the side of his neck and in one swift movement carved along his throat. One after another, they each pulled out a similar dagger and repeated the process. A giant stone doorway of cyclopean design manifested in the void beyond the light of the sconces. Michael made his way between the bodies of himself. He stepped on and over them with no care. His singular purpose had been made clear, and he would now achieve his ultimate dream. The doorway opened by itself as he approached. The stonework dragged over the marble, which created a terrible screeching noise as it let in the darkened light of the black sun. Heavy rain beat down on Michael as he stepped back onto the solid ground again. He turned back and the pyramid was gone, but the black sun remained. he felt the presence watching him through the darkened hole in the sky. It spoke to him in an angry tongue of sharp words and biting commands. He couldn't fight the compulsion to obey it. Every muscle, every fiber, every molecule of his body demanded to listen and obey. Rain poured over every fleck of dirt around Michael, but he remained completely dry. Outside of his small sphere of influence, the world was engulfed in a torrential downpour so thick you could barely see through it. In the shadowed edges of the rain, he could see the movement of creatures. His vision strained to see the silhouettes of otherworldly beings swaying and dancing in the rain. Their visage was obscured almost completely except for an outline of tentacles and pincers. Some were small, while others towered over him. He knew they meant him no harm. His goal was singular, his purpose absolute. He would spread the word, and the word was death. Michael walked to the edge of the tree line, which was now only a few meters away. His trek back through the forest was uneventful and far easier than before. The rain followed him everywhere he went, and he continued to be able to walk unfettered by heat, insects, or other burdens. Hunger and tiredness had left him completely. He felt nothing except for a burning desire to spread the influence to others. Michael wasn't sure exactly how far the rain outstretched from him, but he knew that it was his goal to bring it where it needed to be. He followed the road back into the small town he had landed in. The inhabitants' muffled screams could barely be heard in the deluge of rain. He carried on, unfazed by the red mixture of blood entering the mists surrounding him. Deep bellows and gurgling sounds began to join the chorus. Their presence fed off the lives they were taking. With each life, they grew a deeper connection to this plane of existence. He had finally reached the ocean, and the deluge slowed to a slight trickle. He peered around but saw nothing. All the noises had stopped, and there was no sight of the silhouettes that had massacred everything in his path.
You stand before the precipice of greatness.
A gurgling voice muttered from below his feet. The sand gave way to scaly and slimy appendages that surfaced on his feet. Michael could see no sign of a mouth or eyes. It was simply a bulging mass of scaly flesh.
Long have we awaited the storyteller so that he might bring us back.
What are you? Michael asked.
We are but an apostle of the Dark Star. You can see him in the sky now. You have been granted sight beyond the veil of your reality. He commands us to feed, and you will give us the buffet of flesh we require.
The thing responded. It slithered over his feet and through the sand. No matter how hard Michael looked, it shifted its form constantly, growing limbs or appendages that would instantly disappear. And if I refuse? Michael leaned down to get a closer look at the creature. It convulsed at his words and shuddered its scales, shifting into a dark, aggressive red.
You would find that incomprehensible thought impossible to follow. I speak to you now as a courtesy. We need not converse. We need only your body. Your species has the technology to share thoughts without even needing to speak them.
Michael pulled his phone out of his pocket and felt compelled to lift it toward the sky.
You will show the world. You will show them that we are real. We exist again, relegated to tall tales and nightmares no longer.
The creature seemed giddy with excitement as Michael hit record on his phone.
Share your vision with the world.
He felt a force move his arm around and through the camera. He could see the tears that hid just beyond our reality. With a few taps of his fingers, the video was uploaded to his newspaper's website, and in a matter of minutes, the view count exploded. There was no response, only more views.
Your species' insatiable need to consume every piece of media is incorrigible. Truly, the world's first real viral video.
The creature laughed and ascended out of the sand. Michael was finally able to see its full form. He dropped to his knees and praised the creature's unholy glory. It was a beauty he had never witnessed. Somehow it was there, but not at the same time. The shifting forms it took on were more spectacular than the last. He could not fully comprehend how such a creature could exist. Yet, here it stood on 2, 3, or even 4 legs. The incomprehensible nature of it compelled Michael to claw at his own eyes. The divinity he had witnessed burned into his mind as the last thing he ever wanted to see. The tendrils whipped up out of the sand and held his arms back. "Why would you deny me?" Michael pleaded.
You have served. You will be granted the gift of life.
The creature lifted Michael and pressed him into his body. The slimy scales melded with his flesh and he finally felt free.
You will witness the end, and then you will live. A memory of your poor forgotten people, forever to bear the punishment.
The creature absorbed Michael fully, who screamed in agony as the scales now dug into his flesh and tore at his skin. His skin burned and his mind rushed with thoughts of every living soul being torn asunder and consumed. Michael would live on for eternity, as eternity is how long it would take for him to bear witness to every death he had caused.
$6746W. Synopsis. I call it the airing cupboard. The room in which I counsel former doctors suspended for breaking down on the job. You see, I'm a stuff-up. I'm on probation from the review board and don't know if I'll ever be allowed to walk the wards as a medical doctor again. A failure. Because I fell in love with training. I fell in love with Maya. I fell in love with partying. And we both fell in love with the deadly drug fentanyl. Until one of us fell in too deep. Dr. Georgian, whose young brain is so big it seems to enlarge her head, has been experiencing a condition she claims is nymphomania, though that's a non-clinical term best avoided. The closest clinical term which could describe Dr. Georgian's decision to have sex with patient in the physiotherapy spa pool is hypersexuality. Or call it plain old depression. Not that it's easy to get a doctor of 25,000 hours experience to admit she has depression, nor any other flaws. Dr. Georgian is reciting the short story I made her write from her tablet. Creative writing is a tool I utilize in the airing cupboard to get my broken doctors to look at their problems objectively. The airing cupboard is the church hall in which my kintsugi gather around me on Tuesday and Thursday mornings to air their angst, to release, to glue their broken shards together with gold. A reminder that they once hurled themselves against something hard and broke apart. Dr. Georgian keeps stopping, putting her tablet down and looking at me to see if I'm satisfied yet. I can tell she's staring at my black eye, thinking I'm the one who's fucked up. The truth is we're all fucked up. Every doctor in the room finds it hard to admit why they're here, airing out their guilt. The head of the review board has ordered every one of my patients to complete therapy sessions in St. Luke the Evangelist Community Hall. The alternative? Never work in medicine again. Doctor, I gotta head off in a couple minutes, Dr. Anson complains, rearranging his shaky, shivering limbs, sitting up and flexing his cramped back. A person gets shakes and cramps when their body chemistry decides it can't exist without the 17 carbon atoms, 19 hydrogens, 3 oxygens, and single nitrogen cherry on top, which, when artfully arranged, make up the hydromorphone we know as dilaudid. I can barely grow a beard and haven't lived long enough to get a driver's license, but I know opioids. I know what Dr. Anson is going through. Tell us why you got a black eye, he says. The group nods along with him. You weren't always a therapist, were you, Doc? We shared. Now you share. How come you get beaten up all the time? If you leave early, Dr. Anson, that's 2 hours you've completed with me, not 3. And that's on you. Guys, you have to do your 99 hours the same as me. Undoctored and 99 for you, Doc, so we heard. I hold my hand up to say, be patient. I roam the circle of broken doctors as if we were playing duck, duck, goose. For years, you brought the dead back to life. The highest training for the highest salary and for the highest stakes. You learned you were infallible. I learned you had to bury feelings of inadequacy. You became more skilled than 99.9% of people in the world. But because you skipped the part of your development where you became at peace with your human flaws, you fuck up. Deep down, you want to get expelled from the Board of Registration. You hate triple shifts. You mess up, and they chastise, berate, and discipline you. But they don't sack you, because they don't want you to quit the hospital, because then they would lose power over you. So, the Board of Reviewers sends you here, because you're a sensitive person trapped in an insensitive profession, and you don't know a way out. Their bulging eyeballs tell me they're not used to being confronted like this, like Maya's eyes when she saw I was going to heaven without her. But my broken doctors are too sensitive. Too sensitive is why a tightly wound Dr. Georgian filleted an elderly heart surgeon at his retirement function. Too sensitive is why hospital reporter Dr. Choi started tweeting the salaries of 143 hospital board executives before security tackled him off of his office chair. Too sensitive is why Dr. Chiamanda sewed her cell phone inside a patient because she was sleepwalking during the day, because she had been up all night on a treadmill, because the staff marathon team convinced her that a single ounce of body fat was unacceptable. Dr. Anderson hoarded breast augmentation photos. Dr. Mona burgled an ambulance. And Dr. Patchouli tasted the blood of an 8-year-old boy because it was Runal, rarest in the world, sacred, precious. Dr. Cruz hoards stainless steel tools. Dr. Rude steals Salisbury steaks from patients' meals. I look at the old cuckoo clock on the oak-paneled wall of St. Luke's. We have 2 more broken doctors to read their simple stories before we can conclude our session. If Supervisor Dr. Selby Chan finds out about my broken docs, I have yet to do exactly 99 hours of therapy within 3 months. They'll be asked to redo their hours from scratch. I'll have to redo my own hours too. As they plead with their eyes to find out whether the session is really over, whether they have advanced another 3% towards returning to the wards, I come close to blurting to them how I broke and became Kintsugi. I know they gossip about me. Final thought of the day, I say, changing the subject. We all feel we deserve to be hurt, but do we actually deserve that? Write me a 20-line acrostic poem in your books, please. Discuss Thursday. Be good to yourself this week. You can go. I shelter in a corner of the room. Dr. Chan has left a voicemail in the courteous, cold voice he uses to tell high achievers they are unsatisfactory to him. He says the review board is ready to see me, to see if me and the Dockside Council can be glued together with gold. My broken docs. People with student loans close to $200,000, most of them. They're offering to clean my house and wax my car so long as I can get them Category 1 restricted permission to conduct medical duties on hospital grounds. Well, 50% of them, that is. Dr. Chan is looking to accept the immediate return of 50% of broken doctors to practicing, so long as the savings they bring to the board outweigh the cost of lawsuits. The board will read out their list of cracked clinicians they want back in service. I'll counter with the doctors I think are ready to return. And as he strokes his gray wizard beard at the head of the table, I'll tell Dr. Chan and Dr. Claire Georgian's clinical depression is attributable to a hormonal malfunction from a damaged pituitary gland, which at first hemorrhaged estrogen and cortisol. Then I'll book Dr. Georgian an urgent brain scan. When I finish checking my voicemails and fantasizing about the fight ahead, my broken docs are still in their chairs, their arms folded. That busted eye, it's turning green, Dr. Abdil smirks. The hematoma occurred 72 hours ago. There's 10 minutes on the clock, Doc, and you're limping too. How come you're so hurt? You have to tell us. I walk on thick, resistant legs to the end of the warehouse, walled with wooden bins full of fruit. We're so deep in the warehouse that seeing what's going on from the street is impossible. I fist bump a guy from South Sudan with black skin that seems to glow blue. I've heard he grew up in fighting rings, breaking other kids' faces when he was 5. After he got his refugee stuff approved, he was actually a medical student here, but couldn't get his student visa extended. So now he's fighting to make his living. He's tossed away his passport. He doesn't even resemble his photograph anymore, because the bones of his face have been dented like an eggshell. Maya first brought me here to school. She got a thrill out of this place. Maya always wanted to be smashed to pieces. She felt guilty for being statuesque with blonde hair, sparkling blue eyes, a ballet dancer's body, terrific parents, and a hard-to-achieve degree that put her on top of a lonely mountain of expectation. I'm told there's a space for me in the cage in 30 minutes, that I can warm up, watch fights, whoop, roar, and throw fruit at the cage. The 3 skirmishes I watch are over in 4 minutes. That's how hard people hit each other here. 2 deadlocked women, skinny, with strange wobbling breasts, claw at each other. One has been practicing Muay Thai, evidently, and cripples the other with a knee to the jaw before putting an arm bar on her opponent till she stops twitching. The referee looks out from the cage, lasering through the audience until his eyes meet mine, but I shake my head momentarily. I can't help her. I'm not allowed to be a doctor here. 2 gang members, one a man-barrel with a stomach that wobbles like an ocean, the other almost 7 feet tall and reeking of cigarettes so bad I can smell him from outside the cage, grapple till they collapse, sleepy and slippery. The tall one vomits blood. A janitor limps in with a mop and bucket. Then Epic and Mega, the big bald twins who run the show, find me in the audience. Epic taps my shoulder with a finger as hard as wood. Just checking in on you, pal. I'm going up tonight, definitely. You positive you want to do this again? Are you a little vulnerable? I was comfy for too long. I need the hurt. The man who shuffles into the ring from the opposite side of the cage is an obese ball man with pale patches across his tits. Those are blooms of a fungus known as Pityriasis versicolor. I want to tell him. His body's constant sweatiness provides fertile ground for that stuff to bloom on the epidermis. I want to put him on Fungisil. I want to get my prescription pad back. You'll have to keep your body as doctory as possible while applying it twice a day over 28 days, my friend. Dab it on like so. Best after you're freshly showered. And I'd like to recommend a dietitian tube. An asteroid slams into my brain. Everything is moving in slow motion. His fist has gone around the side of my daydreaming head and smashed my ear. He crosses the ring and slaps his wobbling arms around me. I'm Dr. Unk, exhausted and nauseous. I want to cry and collapse. Tinnitus I'll never hear again. I glimpse Sudan in the crowd with his little finger on his lips whistling. Throw in everything he's saying. Wriggle, squeal, scratch, bite. Come out of this, Doc. I don't have kids or a cat to go home to. My parents are dead. All I've got is my airing cupboard and my clients. So I growl back into the fight, headbutt the fat man, and both our noses explode because I have to be punished. After all, when you put someone in an anesthetic coma, they lie on edge between here and gone. I took Maya to the edge because she told me she wanted to see the view. Right up on the edge, all the way, millimeters away, then right on the razor blade. And then she was gone. And for that, I deserve to be hurt. 5th year. After 4 years of lectures, exams, and parties, and trying to hold on to being like all the other 22-year-olds, my class and I split up across the country to do our residencies in real hospitals. The 5th year, shit got real. No more sneaking away from our tutors to go and smoke. No more acting like we didn't have to look after ourselves. I got assigned to Middlemore. The place was a factory. 1,000 beds, 30 theaters, 3 sites, 5,000 staff. 500,000 patients a year. And there was me, the bee in the hive, regretting I didn't get out earlier. I and some other kids moved into this crumbling old red brick dormitory in Otahu with fancy arches and stained glass. We were close to a Samoan butchery, a Rarotongan bottle shop, and an Afghani bakery. We helped out on the wards. We sat in on consultations. Old ladies stopped us on the street for praise, as if we were real legitimate docs. Old gambling addicts bought us beers and praised us docs. My people and I limped into the tavern every morning at 10 for karaoke and to suck shots from 100-milliliter syringes. My first week in med dorm, I discovered my popularity wasn't just a high school phenomenon. I'd smashed every exam at school, and I played center in the A-team for the inter-school soccer, and still found time to get merit or excellence on all my exams and keep friends and learn about sex with a group of safe, clean kids. When people found out anesthesia was my major, they knew I was lining myself up for an extreme climb with some of the highest standards, keeping people on the live side of death. Challenging, sure, but I'd never settled for anything less. We tried to get through a week at a time. We had a party to balance every exhausting assessment. In the halls, we had to prove ourselves by doing an IV stand, while the boys on scholarships from Tehran and Tokilo whooped it up, everyone wearing scrubs and disposable smocks. The girls went as hard on their IV stands as we did. The IV stand was like a keg stand, except there was an intravenous delivery with 3-liter bags of $10 wine hanging off of it. Dr. Jody, Dadu, did a tour of the dorms early in the night to check we were still alive, but instead of scolding us, he just doctor-upped a bunch of cricket jokes and made a conversation about Shane Wayne versus Brian Lara, and kissed the girls' cheeks and called them Betty. It meant daughter. Johnny Krishnan told me. That's what we were to Dr. Jody. We were his beloved kids. He would tisk and chide, but he would forgive us for the occasional blowout. Dadu Jody trusted us. This really tall girl, Maya, was strong enough to hold my legs vertically all by herself while I went to work sucking on a liter of wine. I could hardly concentrate. I stared up at her tree trunk legs and her muscular chest. I puked before she could tip me the right way up, and the fizzy, bubbly wine puke bile went into my nose, and they had to let me down so my airway wasn't blocked. And as I writhed in a lake of bile, the acronym for the procedure for a blocked-up airway flashed behind my eyes like a billboard. Puked-up chunks of pineapple pizza stuck to my dick, hanging out from my meager gown. Maya stood over me, guzzling Jägermeister and laughing at my corpse, but the boys' slaps, pats, and noogies told me I was in. I'd passed the piss-up test. They hauled me up and applauded. I crowd surfed. We raced each other to be the first to name the 12 stages in a ventilator inspection checklist while necking 12 shots of rum. An hour later, I was asleep in the bathroom on a pile of moldy laundry. I was wasted, but not wasted enough to override the switch in my brain that told me to wake at dawn and annihilate everyone who thought they were smarter than me. Especially Maya, with her fail comment every time I got the Incus and Malleus ear bones mixed up. When the dawn alarm dinged on my phone, I stood, washed my dick in the basin with hand soap, and reconstructed what had happened last night. Maya, on the floor behind me, looked like a dropped marionette. I kneeled over her and studied the movement of her slumbering lips. Her esophageal tract was cramped. I adjusted her head and brushed a sticky curl away from her brow. I hovered my lips over hers. I nearly kissed her while she slept. She was in paradise, though. Wherever she was, she would be happy. No triathlons, no supervisors, no swatting or blood types and allergens and lipid oxygen bonding precipitors. No senior doctors in her dreams were yelling at her hard enough to shake her hair. No guilt, no shame, no hunger, just unconscious bliss. Instead of kissing those lips, I draped a towel over her, stepped into fresh beach shorts and jandals and a Hawaiian shirt I found on the floor of some dude snoring in a bedroom with 3 naked med students piled around him. I walked to my grand round, picking bits of bacon out of my ears. Dr. Harkenwall Jody, godfather of anesthesiology, was in the front of the meeting room, illuminated by the projector, asking everyone if they could explain the TCSC of having an airway blocked. TCSC. Total Combined Status Circuit? No, consequences. Everything in anesthesia is a consequence. I stuck my hand up. Everybody stared at me as I answered. Kids in class. When the esophagus is blocked, like even just 10% is going to stop you being able to aspirate your carbon dioxide, I ventured. So that CO2's going to line your bronchioles like cholesterol or something. The CO2 makes the muscle in your airway all thick and saggy till it almost closes. Real bad if you're obese. You said we're supposed to flag it as a code orange compound complication in pre-op. Mr. Delight! Dr. Godfather clapped and grinned so wide I saw a flash of gold. CO2 every child. 2 particles of oxygen and 1 of carbon. Dear friend, the oxygen we need in the air we breathe. Tell me something, child. Tell me something really important. Tell me how many one-day international test caps MS Donny is having, child. I picked a shard of vomit from the yellow stubble on my lip. 156? 158. Nerd. Somebody threw a drink bottle against my head. Insufficient! Dr. Jody slapped his desk. He grinned wickedly. 156 milligrams of sodium pentothal, patient stable. With 2 more milligrams, we are taking the patient to 158. Mister, is the patient stable? Patient critical, I mumbled and hung my head. Maya limped in towards the end, just when Dr. Jody talked about the rhesus negative tests, absorbed opioids compared to the Rh positive blood. She showered, put on a miniskirt and heels, and even wore her stethoscope. A waft of fruity shampoo went up as she sat in front of me, blocking me with broad, sporty shoulders. Amaya was blocking out the presentation, blocking the adulation from our godfather. Down in front, I whispered. She half turned her head and sneered. Fuck you. Make me. She winked out of the corner of her eye and said in a low voice, Get to the top of Mount Aspiring before me. I'll fuck you. I'd never found anyone as competitive as me until I met Maya. We were obsessed with one-upping each other. A dancer since the age of 4, Maya was 2 inches taller than me, even without high heels, which she put on at least once a week when she dragged me to another social. We'd drive up to her dad's yacht club and suck oysters out of the shell in massive swish glasses of Chardonnay. Then the next night, she'd have box fit with a couple of the girls from our rheumatology group and go clubbing afterwards, and I'd limp behind her, unable to match her shot for shot, and watch in a corner with folded arms while she zigzagged on stage, her huge hips bumping against her friends. There were only 168 hours in each week. Still, she seemed to fit in 50 hours of tramping, 50 hours of volunteer hearing and vision checks on poor kids in the ghetto, 50 hours of partying and fine dining, and not to mention 50 hours networking with the Silverbacks, so she would have her first hospital career lined up after she graduated. Lined up before me. That's what it was all about with Maya. She liked me, because I was a threat she could stay ahead of. We had sex in a long drop toilet buzzing with flies as soon as we got back to the hut where we'd left all the other med students who couldn't keep up. The first time we kissed was with blue, numb lips on the summit of Mount Aspiring, shivering, trying to find each other over the screeching wind that sucked the flapping jackets off our skin. Every other time we made love after that, there were 3 of us present. Maya, me, plus an enhancer, some tingly lubricant or a bottle of schnapps or a pill or a canister of nitrous oxide she'd smuggled in her pussy. In our 10th lovemaking session, Maya pulled out a bag of weed and a pipe. We knew we could both hold out for longer when we were stoned. That was part of the race. The time after that, Maya slipped a bright, shiny 80-milligram circle of OxyContin between my lips, and I couldn't stop falling through the clouds. She used her strong arms to hold me inside her, while turbulence tried to flap my body away. I was skydiving towards the landscape of her body, and my ears hummed, and when I slammed into the mattress, I came so hard it felt like my heart was being sucked down into my stomach and shot right through her. I panted for 10 minutes afterwards. By 12 minutes, I got Maya to use her heart check monitor to confirm my BPM was coming down. The oxy made us move slowly and forget everything as soon as it happened. Maya found her heart check amongst drawers and drawers full of stuff she'd swiped from the wards. Stuff she didn't even need, like speculums, scalpels, and marrow scrapers. "Babe," I gasped, clutching the white sheet against my heaving chest. "Oh my God, that's gotta be the best shit on the planet." That's a fail. Carfentanil is the best shit on the planet. She slowed her breathing so she wouldn't seem as exasperated as me. "You have got to get some." "I wish. 10 mils will get you high. 50 milligrams will kill you. Only Dr. Jody can get you a script." Before I knew it, she'd pushed a pill inside me again. A different one this time. A little gray square, like a Lego piece. Maya put her hands on her ankles and wrapped them around my ears. Her vulva looked like a ripening orchard. Her thighs were huge pale petals. Clitoral hood, clitoris, labia minora, urethral opening, vaginal opening, perineum. That one was dilated, by the way. "It'll get you toasted," she sang, laughing, knocking a bottle of champagne off the side table. She grabbed a hunk of my hair and mashed my face into her orchid. "Hurry up already. I'm way ahead of you." I was a ton of bad things. Drunk on exhaustion, addicted to coffee and cycling after punishing myself for staying up till 2 a.m. memorizing chemical compounds and their antidotes. But I had to let everyone know I wasn't a narc. Well, I was and I wasn't. I was on top of everything. I could dob Maya into Dr. Selby Chan's board of review in a heartbeat, or party just as hard as Maya. Either way, I showed the world only what I wanted them to see. I would drink 6 jugs at a grassroots rural medical club garden party and still wobble home on my bike alive. I would hold my liquor deep inside me, metabolize it, beat the intoxicant, piss it out, glug another triple shot espresso, and bike another 20 miles. I passed the breath tests. I put blankets on trainee interns sleeping shirtless and shivering on the clubhouse balcony. I watched over them while they slept, making other people comfortable, tucking them in. It was all part of being superior. Nothing was better than outlasting Maya, especially when she'd had a screaming match over the phone when her mother wouldn't release any more money from Maya's trust fund, and Maya would try to drink herself into a coma to stick it to her mum. With no idea what to do outside the wards, bored in our apartment, we would race to see who could pour a bottle of tequila into 25 shot glasses and down it all. If you spilled a drop, you had to lick it up. I loved it when Maya staggered around on her hands and knees and then collapsed. I would get a cloth and wipe her face, and then use a glass bottle to keep the 7 cervical vertebrae on her neck straight and whisper in her ear, "Beat ya." She would try to kill herself, and I would one-up her by keeping her alive. Then I would kiss her while she slept. 6th year. From the moment I locked my bike until I left the hospital, my days were about waiting for disaster to strike, and then feeling a sting of excitement or disappointment as another day went disaster-free. I was amazing at my job, and a career would be waiting for me as soon as I graduated. With their pathetic 3-year degrees, the little squeaky anesthetic technicians always joked about us sleep doctors being like air traffic controllers. Depress the plunger of the syringe, the plane takes off. Watch the monitor for hours, putting your nose to the lips of the patient. Plane lands. Time to wake up, sleepyhead. Applause, occasionally, if Dr. Jody read out the printout and saw our patients had avoided tachycardia. Like the other gazes we get rid of when we exhale, almost all the anesthetic passing through a person's blood separates the good compounds from the lungs and aspirates through a patient's cool lips. The best part of the job is a free snifter of something special, and on the job, too. If I leaned in close to a patient's nose, I could toke on a sneaky snifter of relaxation when the surgeons weren't looking. Just between the patient and me, our little secret. If Dr. Jody wasn't trailing behind me demanding reports on cricket or cardio, I would lock myself in the dispensary so I could sign out drugs without being interrupted. Patients' half-used drug bottles on my trolley, supposedly headed for the incinerator, personal bottles up my ass. Maya and I would bump into each other in the corridors and walk funny, wide and uncomfortable, like John Wayne. Howdy, partner. We'd wink at each other, smile, and kiss as if we had enough gear to give us a good day off. Didn't matter if I was sitting in on the surgery, doing pre-op checks or post-op, filling out timesheets, or just sitting through grand rounds. As little as half a tab of paracodeine would melt the anxiety away. Just hearing the names of the drugs on the patient's notes made me relax. They sounded divine. Dilaudid made me think of eyelids snapping open and irises dribbling color from 100 Crayolas left in the rain. Isoflurane sounded so laboratory pure that I wouldn't be responsible for whatever it did to my body. The hard industrial dare of desflurane. The stay away I'm powerful of sevoflurane. Demerol made me imagine crisp, clean white things. Vecuronium sounded like a Roman noble. Risperidol, a breath of fresh air. Fentanyl sounded like a fountain of bliss. Maya and me were only in the apartment at the same time a couple days a week, but she would always leave my meds taped to the bathroom mirror if she scored first. I thought about fucking other girls, but there wasn't anyone who spiced up sex like Maya. Besides, any other girl in the world would judge me for the way I chose to relax. If Maya and I caught up for a box of noodles before the movies, we would run codes as we cycled to the cinema. What's code purple, hotshot? Failure to respond. Aspirate. What's code square, then? Allergic reaction to augmentin. Code black. Suffocating. Who was the first batsman to score a double century in ODI? Sachin Tendulkar, bitch. You sound just like Dadu. Lol. It was a rainy Saturday, and everybody on the planet was watching the World Cup when Dr. Jody presented me with a lab coat with my name embroidered on the breast pocket. I slumped against him like we were embracing, lay my head on his shoulder, and thanked him. I had so much morphine in my blood that I couldn't open my eyes wide enough to make eye contact. You sleepy, BT? Sorry, Dr. Jody. Just trying to keep up with you. He patted my shoulder. You need to rest for the first 11 this Saturday, no? We take Canterbury District Health Board. We kill them. We hugged and laughed. Be good to yourself, my boy. Unwind. Last night, Maya had put a red light bulb in the bedside lamp, shot me up with 20 milligrams of propofol, and pulled me into some red, sweaty swamp I didn't come out of for days. I am unwinding, Doc. I promise. I ran the shower and used my 10 private minutes to push a tiny 16-gauge needle between my hallux toe and index toe, singing distal, proximal, we won't forget 'em all. My medicine cooled my boiling bones, and my body thanked me straight away. It told me I had needed this all my life. I'd never even had alcoholism in my family tree. Still, as I watched the shower water bead on my skin, and I drank it and gargled it and tried to snatch steam fairies from the air, giggling like kindergarten, there was a voice crawling around in the back of my skull, whispering, "This has always been in you." Dilaudid is more powerful than any gas, and propofol is more powerful still, but only fentanyl will get you into heaven. The shower steam danced with the helices of my DNA and popped, fizzed, slithered into my toes, wriggled into my balls, and pushed on my prostate gland. I fell backward into the bath and delighted in the pink food coloring swirling into the water, pooling in my belly button. I staggered back into the sober world when I heard the crack of a whip. I sat upright. The strobe light switched off, and the 200 frames per second I'd been watching slowed, and I decided the folded-armed woman in front of me wearing a scowl and trembling lips was Maya. She was mad and upset because I cracked my skull and lain in the bathtub till the hot water ran freezing and I'd turned purple. What really pissed her off was I'd done drugs without her. And she had a shift beginning in 10 minutes, and she was going to have to go to work cold, fucking sober. Flames were shooting out of my cheekbones where she'd slapped me, but I was somehow dry, as if she'd slapped the shower off of me. I was in a white ward, a hospital. God damn it. And there was a cotton bandage around my skull. Maya, immaculate in a $600 dress her mum had paid for, leaned close to my ear. Tight, tucked-in sheets meant I couldn't move my arms. Her lips brushed my ear as she pretended to kiss me. It would be the first kiss in weeks. We never made love anymore, just injected each other's spines and writhed in our damp bed, masturbating, and slept for days. She squeezed my scalp. "I'm gonna pay you back for this, you little prick." Dr. Jody entered, glowering, shaking his grumpy musk all over. Maya kissed and squeezed him extra hard. Fucking try hard. What's the process for discarding vials of fentanyl once drawn, eh? Speak, boy. You are naming for me 12 risk factors when administering epidurals to an epileptic. Who is the vice captain of the Bangladeshi, Who was thrown more overs, Yasir Shah or Kuldeep Yadav? He shifted his gaze to Maya. You, miss, you are taking care of mister? Oh, we've spoken, she hissed through her fangs. Next time he does something this stupid, he knows he could die. 7th year. Patient Priyanka M. had trouble relaxing the lower half of her body to let her baby out. I elbowed the nurses aside and rubbed topical anesthetic in a delicate rainbow pattern across her back, whispering susurrations. As I bent toward the floor to pull the wide-gauge needle from my kit, I licked the lidocaine cream from my fingers, quietly shivering with ecstasy as the beautiful cocktail of sodium, nitrogen, barium, and boron soaked through the palatoglossus into my lingual nerves, my trigeminal nerve, my hypoglossal nerve, and the glossopharyngeal, from the lingual to the vagus, tickling my throat, warm and cooling all at once. I stood. The sleepy grin I gave the team was drunken, cheeky, slutty. I licked my tingling lips, told the frightened-looking nurses to steady the patient, and directed the gracefully curved tip of the two-hoy needle expertly into the patient's lower thoracic nerve. Patient Priyanka gasped and squeezed the sides of her cot. Quickly, I pushed towards her corda inquina and set up the rigging. I'd practiced on Maya. We'd made love with tubes sticking out of her back, crunching as we writhed, wriggled, and shuddered. I just managed to push in the loss of resistance syringe and feed the milk of the poppy inside her dura mater before I let go of the rigging and dribbled some instructions to the nurses to plug the patient's release button in so patient Priyanka could squirt heaven inside herself. Walked crisply out into the corridor, leaving the yabbering clamor behind me as I rounded the nearest corner, tugged on 3, then 4, finally 5 covered doors, before I found one as inviting as a hotel. Walls 2 meters apart, with a paint-splattered aluminum basin to sit on so I could tear off my sock, jam a needle between my big and little toe, tickle the medical calicancele nerve with a little drink of bliss, and plunged the needle's depressor down so hard I blasted all the way up to my sciatic nerve. I rolled hard into a pile of buckets. Final year. Maya fell asleep on a flight of stairs and tumbled down and cracked her femur. They gave her a blood test, and the nurses looked at the results and ran and got Dr. Jody. When she woke, she was a druggie. Nobody trapped in a plaster cast in traction. Dr. Jody was scribbling on his prescription pad, but was angling it protectively away from her. He even shunted his chair back a foot from her bed. He wrote her a script for morphine, and she glared at the pathetic quantity he was signing off. Don't you have anything stronger? Dr. Jody told me later that she would have lunged at him like a vampire if she hadn't the cast on her leg. I agreed it was a shame what had happened to her. If I could get my hands on the bastard that got her hooked. I was losing my family. I tried to hang out with the boys, but everyone was dispersing to Britain, Canada, or the South Island. They were off being paramedics or rural doctors or lecturers. Some of them even had admitted being a doctor was too stressful. They quit. And now the worst drug they did was cholesterol. At home, Maya shot up and watched TV all day. She saw this thing on Discovery. A tiger was sedated with 100 mils of fentanyl. She took up the challenge. She dosed as much as a tiger, then as much as a dolphin, then as much as an Indian elephant. Smash it, she said one day, just as I was about to go to work. Crack it open. She pointed her scratching knife at me. Immediately! There was nothing around the house to crack through the plaster cast on Maya's leg, so I went out and bought a spade with a good sharp edge. I did a few practice whacks on the arm of the couch and the coffee table. I don't think I should do this, I told her. Then how the fuck am I supposed to get to my femoral vein, genius? I need a hit first. She nodded and made a hurry-up, swirling motion with her index finger. I injected myself and shot her up through the crappy sapphirous vein on her foot to appease her while I got ready for the big injection. Then I was ready to take off her cast. The first few whacks with the spade cracked the plaster. The last whack cut into her muscle. Maya cried, peed into her dressing gown, and bled on the couch. She didn't want a bandage, though. Maya begged for another squirt. I dialed for an ambulance, and they rushed her in while she cried, "Carafin, cuff," sliding between alive and dead. Her re-broken femur, weaked, cracked, and sharp, had punctuated her femoral artery, and her leg was blue and fat, blood leaking inside her like a garden hose. Dr. Jody babbled in Hindi. His eyes glinted, wet and shiny as he wailed, wept, and chased the stretcher down the corridor. The only word I caught was "BT." "Fentanyl won't do it, Dadu," I told him on the edge of the operating theater. "It has to be the strong stuff." He looked at me with hurt. Dr. Jody was our top physician, but he let his children cling to his legs. We were dragging him down. "With apology to the god," he sighed, withdrew his pad and signed the authorization. I raced to the dispensary, got the carfentanil, and on the way back paused with the vial in my hand, licking my lips, just staring at the prize I was holding. 24 carbons, 30 hydrogens, and a couple of nitrogen and oxygen atoms are positioned on the compound just so. Symmetrical and beautiful. I was standing outside a giant white clean toilet. I could lock myself away and go on holiday right now. Escape all this. No. Resist, man. Patience. They said there were less than 10 minutes to get Maya's leg opened. Fresh blood put into her, and the severed lower section of the artery rerouted. 8 people were in the room, half of them just healthcare assistants mopping up as Dr. Jody clamped the upper half of the pulsating artery. Maya gasped and tried to sit up. People without time to gown upheld her down while she kicked their nice shirts. "Anesthetic, 10 milligrams only, bastard, fuck! I'm on it. I plugged her in, pushed the trolley to the corner, tubes everywhere, and stood there with my nose against the heart monitor, watching my eyes plane in the air, shuddering against turbulence. I depressed 10 milligrams of carfentanil into her tubes, and her vitals dropped, lurched, and dropped again. Her face went from purple to white as she lost a full liter of blood, then 1.5 liters. Nobody paid attention to me. Everything was shouting in his shoulders. I bent over her and kissed her lips goodbye. I squeezed the depressor and pushed into her every last drop of the fountain of ecstasy she'd been waiting for. 20 mils, 30, finally 50. Clear and pure. Carfentanil slid into her bloodstream as her plane dropped silently out of the sky, and her vitals plunged to nil, while I sucked the loaded breath from her lips, and the nurse began bellowing at me. "What did you do? What did you do?" So, broken docks. That's my story. I'm not allowed back on the ward. Yet. And I have to help you. All of you. I must prove to Dr. Chan that I can watch over my broken doctors while you're awake. And if you trust me, I'll be there while you sleep.
On a blue afternoon in autumn, Riku and Miki drove south from Numatsu in his silver convertible along the coast of the Izu Peninsula. The temperature was mild for the end of October, and the air was clear, the sun glinting off the Suruga Bay. She wore sunglasses and, to protect her hair, a yellow scarf with a design of orange butterflies. He wore driving gloves, a black dress shirt, and a loosened white tie. The car, the open road, the rush of the wind made it impossible to converse, and so, for miles, she watched the bay to their right, and he the rising slopes of maple and pine to their left. Just outside the town of Dogoshima, a song came on the radio. Just you, just me. And they turned to look at each other. She waited for him to smile. He did. She smiled back. And then he headed inland to search for the hidden onsen in Ugami. They'd met the previous night at the Limit, an upscale hostess bar. Riku's employer had a tab there, and he was free to use it when in Numatsu. He'd been once before, drunk, and spent time with a hostess. Her conversation sounded rote, like a script, her flattery grotesquely opulent, and therefore flat. The instant he saw Miki, though, in her short black dress with a look of uncertainty in her eyes, he knew it would be a different experience. He ordered a bottle of Nika Yoichi and 2 glasses. She introduced herself. He stood and bowed. They were in a private room at a polished table of blonde wood. The chairs were high-backed and upholstered like thrones. To their right was an open-air view of pines and the coast. She waited for him to smile, and eventually he did. She smiled back and told him, "I'm writing a book." Riku said, "Aren't you supposed to tell me how handsome I am?" "Your hair's perfect," she said. He laughed. "I see." "I'm writing a book," she said again. "I decided to make a study of something." "Oh, you're a scientist," he said. "We're all scientists. We watch and listen, take in information, process it. We spin theories by which we live." "Well, what if they're false?" "What if they're not?" she said. He shook his head and took a drink. They sat in silence for a time. She stared out past the pines, sipping her whiskey. He stared at her. "Tell me about your family," said Riku. She told him about her dead father, her ill mother, her younger sister and brother. But when she inquired about his parents, he said, "Okay, tell me about your book." "I decided to study a season, and since autumn is the season I'm in, it would be autumn. It's a natural history of autumn." "You've obviously been to the university," he said. She shook her head. "No, I read a lot to pass the time between clients." "How much have you written?" "Nothing yet. I'm researching now, taking notes." "Do you go out to Thousand Tree Beach and stare at Fuji in the morning?" "Your sarcasm is intoxicating," she said. He filled her glass. "No, I do my research here. I ask each client what autumn means to him." "And they tell you?" She nodded. Some just want to say how big their biceps are, but most sit back and really think about it. The thought of it makes all the white-haired Oji-san smile, the businessmen cry, the young men a little scared. A lot of it is the same, just images, the colorful leaves, the clear, cold mornings by the bay, a certain pet dog, a childhood friend, a drunken night. But sometimes they tell me whole stories. "What kind of stories?" "A very powerful businessman. One of the other hostesses swore he was a master of the 5 elements. Once told me his own love story about a young woman he had an affair with. It began on the final day of summer, lasted only as long as the following season, and ended in the snow." What did you learn from that story? What'd you put in your notes? I recorded his story as he told it, and afterward wrote, "The story of a ghost." Why a ghost? He asked. I forget, she said. And I lied. I attended Waseda University for 2 years before my father died. Well, you didn't have to tell me, he said. I knew when you told me you called the businessman's story the story of a ghost. Pretentious? She asked. Yeah. He shrugged. Maybe, she said and smiled. Forget about that, said Riku. I will top that Make Inu businessman's exquisite melancholy by proposing a field trip. He sat forward in his chair and touched the tabletop with his index finger. My employer recently rewarded me for a job well done and suggested I use, whenever I like, a private onsen he has an arrangement with down in Itsu. I need only call a few hours in advance. A field trip? She said. What will we be researching? Autumn. The red and yellow leaves. The place is out in the woods on a mountainside, hidden and very old-fashioned, so no frills. I propose a dohan, an overnight journey to the onsen Inugami. A date, she said, and our attentions will only be on autumn? Nothing else? You can trust me when I say that is entirely up to you. Your hair inspires confidence, she said. You can arrange things with the house on the way out. I intend to be in your book, he said, and prevented himself from smiling. After hours of winding along the rims of steep cliffs and bumping down tight dirt paths through the woods, the silver car pulled to a stop in a clearing in front of a large, slightly sagging farmhouse, Minka style, built of logs with a thatched roof. 20 yards to the left of the place, there was a sizable garden filled with dying sunflowers, with 10-foot stalks, their heads bowed. To the right of the house, there was a slate path that led away into the pines. The golden, late afternoon light slanted down on the clearing, shadows beginning to form at the tree line. We're losing the day, said Riku. We'll have to hurry. Miki got out of the car and stretched. She removed her sunglasses and stood still for a moment, taking in the cool air. I have your bag, said Riku, and shut the trunk. As they headed for the house, 2 figures appeared on the porch. One was a small old woman with white hair, wearing monpe pants and an indigo katazome jacket with a design of white flames. Next to her stood what Miki at first mistook for a pony. The sight of the animal surprised her and she stopped walking. Riku went on ahead. Grandmother Chinatsu? He said, and bowed. Your employer has arranged everything with me. Welcome, she said. A small wrinkled hand with dirty nails appeared from within the sleeve of the jacket. She beckoned to Miki. Come, my dear, don't be afraid of my pet Ono. He does not bite. She smiled and waved her arm. As Miki approached, she bowed to Grandmother Chinatsu, who only offered a nod. The instant the young woman's foot touched the first step of the porch, the dog gave a low growl. The old lady wagged a finger at the creature and snapped, Humidity! Then she laughed, low and gruff, the sound at odds with her diminutive size. She extended her hand and helped Miki up onto the porch. Come in, she said, and led them into the farmhouse. Miki was last in line. She turned to look at the dog. Its coat was more like curly human hair than fur. She winced in disgust. A large, flattened pug face. No snout to speak of. Black eyes, sharp ears, and a thick bottom lip, bubbling with drool. Oh no, she said, and bowed slightly in passing. As she stepped into the shadow beyond the doorway, She felt the dog's nose press momentarily against the back of her dress. In the main room, there was a rock fireplace within which a low flame licked 2 maple logs. Above hung a large paper lantern, orange with white blossoms, shedding a soft light in the center of the room. The place was rustic, wonderfully simple. All was wood, the walls, the ceiling, the floor. There were 3 ancient carved wooden chairs gathered around a low table off in an alcove at one side of the room. Grandmother led them down a hallway to the back of the place. They passed a room on the left, its screen shut. At the next room, the old lady slid open the panel and said, "The toilet." Farther on, they came to 2 rooms, one on either side of the hallway. She let them know who was to occupy which by mere nods of her head. "The bath is at the end of the hall," she said. Their rooms were tatami style, straw mats and a platform bed with a futon mattress in the far corner. They undressed, put on robes and sandals, and met in the hallway. As they passed through the main room of the house, Ono stirred from his spot by the fireplace, looked up at them, and snorted. "Oh, easy, easy," said Riku to the creature. He stepped aside and let Miki get in front of him. Once out on the porch, she said, "Ono is a little scary." "Only a little?" he asked. Grandmother appeared from within the plot of dying sunflowers and called that there were towels in the shed out by the spring. Riku waved to her as he and Miki took the slate path into the pines. Shadows were rising beneath the trees and the sky was losing its last blue to an orange glow. Leaves littered the path, and the temperature had dropped. The scent of pine was everywhere. Curlews whistled from the branches above. "Are you taking notes?" he called ahead to her. She stopped and waited for him. "Which do you think is more autumnal? The leaves, the dying sunflowers, or Grandmother Chinatsu?" "Too early to tell," he said. "I'm withholding judgment." Another 100 yards down the winding path, they came upon the spring nearly surrounded by pines except for one spot, with a view of a small meadow beyond. Steam rose from the natural pool, curling up in the air, reminding Miki of the white flames of the old lady's jacket. At the edge of the water, closest to the slate path, there was ancient stonework, a crude bench, a stacked rock wall covered with moss, 6 foot by 4, from which a thin waterfall splashed down into the rising heat of the onsen. "Lovely," said Miki. Riku nodded. She left him and moved down along the side of the spring. He looked away as she stepped out of her sandals and removed her robe, which she hung on a nearby branch. He heard her sigh as she entered the water. When he removed his robe, her face was turned away, as if she were taking in the last light of the meadow. Meanwhile, Riku was taking Miki in, her slender neck, her long black hair, and how it lay on the curve of her shoulder, and her breasts. "Are you getting in?" she asked. He silently eased down into the warmth. When Miki turned to look at him, she immediately noticed the tattoo on his right shoulder, a vicious swamp eel with rippling fins and needle fangs and a long body that wrapped around Riku's back. It was the color of the moss on the rocks of the waterfall. Riku noticed her glancing at it. He also noticed the smoothness of her skin, and her nipples were erect. "Who is your employer?" she asked. "He's a good man," he said, and lowered himself into a crouch so that only his head was above water. "Now, pay attention," he said, and looked out at the meadow, which was already in twilight. "To what?" she asked, also sinking down into the water. He didn't respond, and they remained immersed for a long time, just 2 heads floating on the surface, staring silently, and listening, steam rising around them. At last light, when the air grew cold, the curlews lifted from their branches and headed for Australia. Riku stood, moved to a different spot in the spring, and crouched down again. Miki moved closer to him. A breeze blew through the pines. A cricket sang in the dark. "Was there any inspiration?" he asked. "I'm not sure," she said. "It's time for you to tell me your story of autumn." She drew closer to him, and he backed up a step. "I don't tell stories," he said. "As brief as you want, but something," she said, and smiled. He closed his eyes and said, "Okay. The autumn I was 17, I worked on one of the fishing boats out of Numatsu. We were out for horse mackerel. On one journey, we were struck by a rogue wave, a giant that popped up out of nowhere. I was on deck when it hit, and we were swamped. I managed to grab a rope, and it took all of my strength not to be drawn overboard. The water was so cold and powerful. I was sure I would die. 2 men did get swept away, and they were never found. That was my natural history of autumn." She moved forward and put her arms around him. They kissed. He drew his head back and whispered in her ear, "When I returned to shore that autumn, I quit fishing." She laughed and rested her head on his shoulder. They dined by candlelight in their robes in the alcove off the main room of the farmhouse. Grandmother Chinatsu served and Ono followed a step behind, so that every time she leaned forward to put a platter on the table, there was the dog's leering face, tongue drooping. The main course was thin slices of raw mackerel with grated ginger and chopped scallions. They drank sake. Miki remarked on the appearance of the mackerel after Riku's story. "Most definitely a sign," he said. They discussed the things they each saw and heard at the spring as the sake bottle emptied. It was well past midnight when the candle burned out, when they went down the hall to his room. 3 hours later, Miki woke in the dark, still a little woozy from the sake. Riku woke when she sat up on the edge of the bed. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I have to use the toilet." She got off the bed and lifted her robe from the mat. Slipping into it, she crossed the room. When she slid back the panel, a dim light entered. A lantern, hanging in the center of the hallway ceiling, bathed the corridor in a dull glow. Miki left the panel open and headed up the hallway. Riku lay back and immediately dozed off. It seemed only a minute to him before Miki was back, shaking him by the shoulder to wake up. She'd left the panel open, and he could see her face. Her eyes were wide, the muscles of her jaw tense, a vein visibly throbbing behind the pale skin of her forehead. She was breathing rapidly, and he could feel the vibration of her heartbeat. "Get me out of here," she said in a harsh whisper. "What's wrong?" he said, and moved quickly to the edge of the bed. She kneeled on the mattress next to him and grabbed his arm tightly with both hands. "We've got to leave," she said. He shook his head and ran his fingers through his hair. It wasn't perfect anymore. He carefully removed his arm from her grip and checked his watch. "It's 3 a.m., he said. "You want to leave?" "I demand that you take me out of this place, now." "What happened?" he asked. "Either you take me now or I will leave on foot." He gave a long sigh and stood up. I'll be ready in a minute," he said. She went across the corridor to her room and gathered her things together. When they met in the hallway, bags in hand, he asked her, "Do you think I should let Grandmother Chinatsu know we're leaving?" "Definitely not," she said, on the verge of tears. She grabbed him with her free hand and dragged him by the shirt sleeve down the hallway. As they reached the main room of the house, she stopped and looked warily around. Was it the dog? He whispered. The coast was apparently clear, for she then dragged him outside, down the porch steps to the silver car. Get in, he said. I have to put the top up. It's too cold to drive with it down. Just hurry, she said, stowing her overnight bag. She slid into the passenger seat just as the car top was closing. He got in behind the wheel and reached over to latch the top on her side before doing his. Miki's window was down, and she heard the creaking of planks from the porch. She leaned her head toward her shoulder and looked into the car's side mirror. There, in the full moonlight, she could see Grandmother Chinatsu and Ono. The old lady was waving and laughing. "Drive!" she shrieked. Riku hit the start button, put the car in gear, and they were off into the night, racing down a rutted dirt road at 50. Once the farmhouse was out of sight, he let up on the gas. "You've got to tell me what happened," he said. She was shivering. "Just get us out of the woods first," she said. "To a highway?" "I can't see a thing. I don't remember all the roads," he said. "We might end up lost." He drove for more than an hour before he found a road made of asphalt. His car had been brutalized by the crude paths and branches jutting into the roadway. There would be 100 scratches on his doors. During that entire time, Miki stared ahead through the windshield, breathing rapidly. "We're on the main road. You want to tell me what happened?" he said. "I got up to use the toilet," she said. "And I did. But when I stepped back out into the hallway to return, I heard this horrible grunting noise. I swear it sounded like someone was choking Grandmother Chinatsu to death in her room. I moved alongside the wall to the entrance. The panel was partially open and there was a light inside. The noise had stopped, so I peered in. And there was the shriveled old lady on her hands and knees on the floor, naked. Her forearms were trembling. Her face was bright red, and she was croaking. At first, I thought she was ill, but then I looked up and realized she was engaged in sexual relations. "Grandmother Chinatsu?" he said and laughed. "Who was the unlucky gentleman?" "That disgusting dog!" She was doing it with Ono? "I almost vomited," said Miki. "But I could have dealt with it. The worst thing was Ono saw me peering in, and he smiled at me and nodded." "Dogs don't smile," he said. "Exactly," she said. "That place is haunted." "Well, I'll figure out where we are eventually and we'll make it back to Numatsu by morning. I'm sorry you were so frightened. The field trip seemed a great success till then." She took a few deep breaths to calm herself. "Perhaps that was the true spirit of autumn," she said. "A story of a ghost," he said. The silver car sped along in the moonlight. Miki was leaning against the window, her eyes closed. Riku thought he was heading for the coast. He took a tight turn on a narrow mountain road and something suddenly lunged out of the woods at the car. He felt an impact as he swerved, turning back just in time to avoid the drop beyond the lane he'd strayed into. Miki woke at the impact and said, "What's happening?" I think I grazed a deer back there. I've got to pull over and check to see if the car's okay." Miki leaned forward and adjusted the rearview mirror so she could look out the back window. "Too late to see," It was a half-mile back. He eased down on the brake, slowing, and began to edge over toward the shoulder.
"There's something chasing us," she said. "I can see it in the moonlight. Keep going! Go faster!"
He downshifted and took his foot off the brake. As he hit the gas, he reached up and moved the mirror out of her grasp so he could see what was following them. "It's a dog," they said. "Oh, but it's the fastest dog I ever saw. I'm doing 45 and it's gaining on us." They passed through an area where overhanging trees blocked the moon.
"Watch the road,"
she said. When the car moved again into the moonlight, he checked behind them and saw nothing. Then they heard loud growling. Each searched frantically to see where the noise was coming from. Swerving out of his lane, Riku looked out his side window and down and saw the creature running alongside, the movement of its 4 legs a blur, its face perfectly human.
"Kuso, open the glove compartment. There's a gun in there. Give it to me." "A gun? Hurry!"
he yelled. She did as he instructed, handing him the sleek 9mm.
"You were right," he said. "The place was haunted."
He lowered his side window, switched hands between gun and wheel. Then, steadying himself, he hit the brake. The dog looked up as it sped past the car, a middle-aged woman's face, bitter, with a terrible underbite and a beauty mark beneath the left eye, riding atop the neck of a mangy gray mutt with a naked tail. As soon as it moved a foot ahead of the car, Riku thrust the gun out the window and fired. The creature suddenly exploded, turning instantly to a shower of salt. "It had a face," he said, maneuvering the car out of its skid. "A woman's face."
"Don't stop," she said. "Please."
"Don't worry." "Now," she said, "who is your employer? Why would he send you to such a place?" Maybe if I tell you the truth, it'll lift whatever curse we're under." "What is the truth?" My employer is a very powerful businessman, and I have heard it said that he is also an onmyoji. You know him. In a moment of weakness, he told you a story about an affair he had. Afterward, he worried that you might be inclined to blackmail him. If the story got out, it would be a grave embarrassment for him both at home and at the office. He told me, spend time with her. They wanted me to judge what type of person you are. And if I'm the wrong kind of person, I'm to kill you and make it look like an accident, he said. "Are you trying to scare me to death? You and the old woman?" "No, I swear. I'm as frightened as you are. And I couldn't harm you. Believe me, I know you would never blackmail him." She rested back against the car seat and closed her eyes. She could feel his hand grasp hers. "Do you believe me?" he said. In the instant she opened her eyes, he saw ahead through the windshield 2 enormous dogs step onto the highway 30 yards in front of the car.
"Watch out!"
she screamed. He'd been looking over at her. He hit the brake before even glancing to the windshield. The car locked up and skidded, the headlights illuminating 2 faces. A man with a thin, black mustache and wire-frame glasses, whose mouth was gaping open, and a little girl, chubby, with black bangs, tongue sticking out. On impact, the front of the car crumpled, the airbags deployed, and the horrid dogs burst into salt. The car left the road and came to a stop on the right-hand side, just before the tree line. Riku remained conscious through the accident. He undid his seatbelt and slid out of the car, brushing glass off his shirt. His forehead had struck the rearview mirror, and there was a gash on his right temple. He heard growling, and, pushing himself away from the car, he headed around to Miki's side. A small, pot-bellied dog with the face of an idiot, sunken eyes and swollen lower lip was drooling and scratching at Miki's window. Riku aimed, pulled the trigger, and turned the monstrosity to salt. He opened the passenger door. Miki was just coming around. He helped her out and leaned her against the car. Bending over, he reached into the glove compartment and found an extra clip for the gun. As he backed out of the car, he heard them coming up the road, a pack of them, speeding through the moonlight, howling and grunting. He grabbed her hand and they made for the tree line. "Not the woods," she said, and tried to free herself from his grasp. "No, there's no place to hide on the road. Come on!" They fled into the darkness beneath the trees, Riku literally dragging her forward. Low branches whipped their faces and tangled Miki's hair. Although ruts tripped them, they miraculously never fell. The baying of the beasts sounded only steps behind them. But when he turned and lifted the gun, he saw nothing but night. Eventually, they broke from beneath the trees onto a dirt road. Both were heaving for breath, and neither could run another step. She'd twisted an ankle and was limping. He put one arm around her to help her along. She was trembling. So was he. "What are they?" she whispered. "Jinmenken," he said. "Huh, impossible." They walked slowly down the road, and, stepping out from beneath the canopy of leaves, the moonlight showed them, 100 yards off, a dilapidated building with boarded windows. "I can't run anymore," he said. "We'll go in there, find a place to hide." She said nothing. They stood for a moment on the steps of the place, a concrete structure, some abandoned factory or warehouse, and he tried his cell phone. "No reception," he said, after dialing 3 times and listening. He flipped to a new screen with his thumb and pressed an app icon. The screen became a flashlight. He turned it forward, held it at arm's length, and motioned with his head for Miki to get close behind him. With a gun at the ready, they moved slowly through the doorless entrance. The place was freezing cold and pitch black. As far as he could tell, there were hallways laid out in a square with small rooms off to either side. "An office building in the middle of the woods?" she said. Each room had the remains of a Western-style door at its entrance, pieces of shattered wood hanging on by the hinges. When he shone the phone's light into the rooms, he saw a window opening boarded from within by a sheet of plywood and an otherwise empty concrete expanse. They went down one hall and turned left into another. Miki remembered she had the same app on her phone and lit it. Halfway down that corridor, they found a room whose door was mostly intact but for a corner at the bottom where it appeared to have been kicked in. Riku inspected the knob and whispered, "There's a lock on this one." They went in, and he locked the door behind them and tested its strength. "Get in the corner, under the window," he said. "If they find us and the door won't hold, I can rip off the board above us and we might be able to escape outside." She joined him in the corner and they sat, shoulders touching, their backs against the cold concrete. "We're sure to be safe when the sun rises." He put his arm around her and she leaned into him. Then neither said a word or made a sound. They turned off their phones and listened to the dark. Time passed, yet when Riku checked his watch, it read only 3:30. Will that in a half hour? He wondered. Then there came a sound. A light tapping, as if rain was falling outside. The noise slowly grew louder, and seconds later, it became clear that it was the sound of claws on the concrete floor. That light tapping eventually became a clatter, as if 100 of the creatures were circling impatiently in the hallway. A strange, guttural voice came from the holes at the bottom corner of the door. "Tomodachi," it said. "Let us in." Riku flipped the flashlight app and held the gun up. Across the room, the hole in the bottom of the door was filled with a fat, pale, bearded face. One eye was swollen shut, and something oozed from the corner of it. The forehead was too high to see a hairline. The thing snuffled and smiled. "Shoot," said Miki. Riku fired, but the face flinched away in an instant. And once the bullet went wide and drilled a neat hole in the door, the creature returned and said, "Tomodachi." "What do you want?" said Riku, his voice cracking. "We are hunting the spirit of the living," said the creature, the movements of its lips out of sync with the words it spoke. "What have we done?" said Miki. "Oh, our hunger is great, but we only require one spirit. We only take what we need. The other person will be untouched. One spirit will feed us for a week." Miki stood up and stepped away from Riku. He also got to his feet. "What are you doing?" she said. "Shoot them." She quickly lit her phone and shone it on him. Instead of aiming the gun at the door, he aimed it at her. "I'm not having my spirit devoured," he said to her. "You said you couldn't hurt me." "It won't be me hurting you," he said. She saw there were tears in his eyes. The hand that held the gun was wobbling. "I'm giving you the girl," he called to the Jinmenkin. "Oh, true benefactor," said the face at the hole. "No," she said. "What have I done?" "I'm going to shoot her in the leg so she can't run. Then, I'm going to let you all in. You will keep your distance from me, or I'll shoot. I have an extra clip, and I'll turn as many of you to salt as I can before you get to me." Turning to Miki, he said, "I'm so sorry. I did love you. But you're a coward. You don't have to shoot me in the leg," she said. "I'll go to them on my own. My spirit's tired of this world." She moved forward and gave him a kiss. Her actions disarmed him, and he appeared confused. At the door, she slowly undid the lock on the knob. Then, with a graceful, fluid motion, she pulled the door open and stepped behind it, against the wall. "Take him!" he heard her call. The Jinmenkin bounded in, dozens of them, small and large, stinking of rain, slobbering, snapping, clawing. He pulled the trigger till the gun clicked empty and the room was filled with smoke and flying salt. His hands shook too much to change the clip. One of the creatures tore a bloody chunk from his left calf and he screamed. Another went for his groin. The face of Grandmother Chinatsu appeared before him and devoured his. The following week, in a private room at the Limit, Miki sat at a blonde wood table, staring out the open panel across the room at the pines and the coast. Riku's employer sat across from her. Ingenious. The natural history of autumn, he said. And you knew this would draw him in? She turned to face the older man. He was a unique person, she said. Too bad for Riku, he said. I wanted to trust him. Really, the lengths to which you'll go to test the spirit of those you need to trust. He's gone because he was a coward. A coward I can tolerate. But he said he loved you, and it proved he didn't understand love at all. A dangerous flaw. He took an envelope from within his suit jacket and laid it on the table. A job well done, he said. She lifted the envelope and looked inside. A cold breeze blew into the room. You know, he said, this season always reminds me of our time together. As she spoke, she never stopped counting the bills. All I remember of that, she said, is the snow.